Hello and welcome to the Podawakens. My name is Jordan, and we are currently ending. This is the last episode of our, not of the show as a whole, but as of our High Republic Road to the Acolyte series, as we are getting closer and closer to the release of the latest Disney Plus Star Wars series. And today I have Sean with me again. He was just on for Fallen Star, and we're going to talk Marvel Comics. How are you today, Sean?
I'm good, Jordan. How we doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you again for gracing us with your presence.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
So last time I had questions for you, all that fun stuff. If people skipped that episode, go back. You can get to know Sean's favorite Star Wars stuff over there. But for this episode, since we're recording it after May 4th, I just wanted to ask, that has become a day in the last decade that we've really started to celebrate our love of Star Wars. And here on our channel, we did a special um, Phantom Menace 25th anniversary special where we talked about the movie, the legacy, our favorite memorabilia, that kind of stuff. And we had our special guest, Tommy Bechtold, on the show. But I wanted to get what maybe if you did anything special for May 4th or how you celebrated on a typical year, if you do at all.
Yeah, so this year, because of the Phantom Menace re-release, me and my two local Star Wars buddies booked tickets back in, I don't know when that was, March, whenever they went on sale.
Same,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, and so we went Friday evening, and thankfully we went to the earlier show because with us getting older, let's just say we were a bit tired by the end of it. But yeah, no, went and saw that on Friday, and then actual May the 4th. Celebrated that with Tales of the Empire, right? So that dropped on Disney Plus this weekend, or this past weekend. And my little guy was sick, had a fever over the weekend, so we watched a bit of Young Jedi Adventures, uh,
Hmm.
and finished that up, which actually ties in really well with these comics, believe it or not. The last episode,
Oh,
uh,
really?
yeah, I'll kind of mention that once we get into it. But yeah, so Tales of the Empire, and then I'm a big Lego guy, as you can kind of see from the webcam here.
Yeah.
And so I ordered two new Lego sets with the May the 4th like promos. So I got the Ghost and Phantom set and the brand new UCS TIE Interceptor. So I am very excited to build
Oh,
those. So
wow.
yeah, pretty packed weekend, all things considered.
Yeah,
Yourself?
we so Saturday was also free comic book day. And as a comic fan, I went down to free comic book day, got some of the free Star Wars comics that they had, and then Saturday was also our baby shower. So it was Winnie the Pooh themed, but my family did have Star Wars stuff for me. Um, I had a special Star Wars bag of goodies that they gave me. One of them was like a little button for me to wear. It says "I am the father" and it has Darth Vader on it. Uh, then they made these cookies that were um, that said the same thing. I am the father, and it's like my parents' friend is a very good baker, and she made like these cookies that look like Winnie the Pooh and all that kind of stuff. And then she also had these separate Star Wars cookies for me, and I got like a shirt that said "I am the father," and then there was a onesie that says "I am your son." That you put on your baby. So
Fantastic.
and a Darth Vader action figure my mom put in there as well. So I've got that was my Saturday. That was the actual May the 4th. Then I came home and watched Tales of the Empire, of course, and that was probably the most I've ever celebrated May the 4th because I feel like usually it's on like a day that sucks. Like this was a Saturday, so this was great.
Hmm.
But usually it's a pretty rough time, I think, for them. You maybe watch something that just released or something. Like what May 4th, I think the final episodes of Clone Wars launched, or somewhere around there that they put those on in like 2020. I think that's when Disney really started celebrating it more.
Yeah, I know. Like us, our show actually launched on May 4th, 2021, with the Bad Batch.
Yes,
Um,
Bad Batch
so
launched
Bad
then.
Batch launched. I think it was on May 4th.
And I think Visions launched one of the years, but I've never watched it. So I'll have to do that at some point. Um, but then Sunday we went and saw Phantom Menace. I bought those tickets on like the day they dropped, March 20th or whatever day it was, like March 20 something that they
Mhm.
released those tickets. I usually go see Star Wars movies with my mom, like since I was a kid. So my mom, my wife, and I went to see Phantom Menace. It was my first time seeing it on the big screen because I'd started watching it my first time I'd watched that was on VHS from the library or video store, and my first movie in theaters for Star Wars was Attack of the Clones. So now the only one I need to see in theaters is A New Hope. I've seen,
Mm.
the Return of the Jedi re-release last year. I saw Empire in a drive-in movie theater during COVID. That was one way that they were able to keep
That's
some of that
right.
stuff
They
going. So
re-released
that was
that.
really cool.
Yep.
And yeah, of course, I've seen all the newest movies when they released, and then episodes 2 and 3 when they released. So really, just need to go see A New Hope in theaters. So hopefully, in a few years for its 50th or whatever, they put it back out there, and I can go see it. Uh, but that was a long day because Sunday we also had our birthing class, so that was like 8 to 2, and then we came home for a little bit, and then had to go out to the movies at 6:30. But for a while, we were the only ones in the like. We walked into the theater 6:30 show. Walked in at 6:25. We were the only ones in the theater, and I'm
Hmm.
like, wow, this movie starts pretty soon. Are we going to be the only ones in this theater? It filled up pretty quickly during the previews, which I wasn't sure if they would do. They didn't do previews for Return of the Jedi when I went to saw it, but they did previews for Phantom Menace.
Yeah, that's right. I forgot they didn't do it for Return of the Jedi. Yeah, we were the same way. When we walked in, I think there were, I don't know, 5 other seats. And mind you, this was like one of those. I think most movie theaters now are like the lounge setup, right, with the fancy recliner
Yes.
chairs and
Yeah.
everything like that. And yeah, it was quite empty. Granted, we went at 6:45, so maybe people were at dinner or what have you, because I think there was a 9:45 show. Also, question for you: were you
Yeah.
near a theater that was running the marathon?
Not to my knowledge. No, I don't think I
Okay.
was.
Yeah, we had one here just outside St. Louis, and I after I booked the tickets, I saw that that theater was running the marathon, and I
Mm.
was like, "Oh man, that would be fun." Because you start at like 8 o'clock and go till 7 o'clock the next day, right? You're locked in the movie theater and everything like that.
Yeah, I don't know
And
if I could do that.
I would definitely be falling asleep during those indoor scenes, those peaceful forest scenes. But no, yeah,
Yes.
it didn't work out. But I do know, or I mean, I've seen on social media people who've done the marathon, and it's like, you know what, it would have been fun to do if I was 10 years younger.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something I probably would have done, yeah, at like 21, and not so much now when I'm turning 33.
Mhm.
It's like, "Oh, okay, that's a little much." I had a friend that did that for when they released Force Awakens. And even then, that was only 6 movies you had to watch. Well, really 7, because then it went right into the Force Awakens. But I don't know if
Mhm.
I'd ever want my first watch to be like coming off 6 straight movies, haven't showered, haven't brushed my teeth, and you're like, all right, now show me the new one. Like, I feel like I want to be prepared mentally for a new Star Wars movie.
For sure.
But yeah, how about the? Did you stick around for the Acolyte scene? I assume you did.
I did, and yeah, I did. I actually liked the fact that they put it at the end, right, as opposed
Yeah,
to the
instead of
beginning.
the beginning.
It makes me think back to when they released the trailer for the Phantom Menace, and it came with Meet Joe Black, and the
Yes, and
lines at
everybody
the
left.
door said leave after the trailer. Um, but yeah, no, I liked it. I was kind of hoping we would get something a little bit different. I feel like we've been getting that kind of
Same scene.
parlor scene a lot. And I'm not sure because I wasn't there, but I think it was also the trailer that they showed at Celebration in London.
Oh,
last
really?
time. So what would that was last April of 23, right?
Yeah.
So and so I think it was the same trailer. I could be wrong. But no, it was good to get kind of that full length scene. It did give a very like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon
Mhm,
feel to it with
mhm.
like the quick,
Cuts.
abbreviated fight moves and stuff like that. Um, but then got the extended trailer after that, right, which dropped I think Monday, wasn't it? And so where we kind of see the oh no, they didn't show that guy. They showed him in the extended trailer that came out Monday. The Sith or the dark side user at the
Yes,
very
yeah,
end,
they didn't show
right?
him in the theater, yeah.
Right. So, but I liked it. It was a nice little nugget at the end of the movie. So, what about you?
Yeah, I'm kind of on the other fence of it that, like, I like that they keep showing us that one scene because I don't really wanna get too much, you know what I'm saying? So I'm like,
Hmm.
"Alright, they keep showing me this. This is probably episode 1," I would assume too. So, like, just don't spoil too much for me. But it was cool really seeing it on the big screen. It makes me wish that they would do like, okay, so when they announced the Mandalorian movie,
Hmm.
I'd gotten an alert because I do the notifications on Twitter, and it was like the Mandalorian and Grogu are coming to theaters, and I was like, oh, that's cool. They're gonna like release the show in like special theaters. Is kind of what my thought was because they just did it for Ahsoka during the run of
Hmm.
Ahsoka. They did like that one episode that was in theaters, and I was like, oh, that must be what this is. Then I click it, and then I was like, oh no, like this is an actual movie announcement. I was really like, wow, that's cool. Um, so that'd be really cool if they would do that every so often. Like, oh, how about you want to see the first like 3 episodes of The Acolyte in theaters? Go see it. Like I think that would be really cool. Because it looked great on the big screen.
Hmm. That's
I
interesting.
mean, like, it looks good.
That's interesting. You said I saw somebody on Twitter post something about that. Yes, that exact thing about building a Star Wars community around kind of the television releases. Like, hey, you want to go see an episode of The Acolyte
Hmm.
or Andor when it comes out later this year or what have you, and you sell like a cheap ticket to a cinema, stream it, each Wednesday, and Wednesday nights are like, if it came out on Wednesday, right? Wednesday is Acolyte night or what have you, because I feel like there's really not a lot of incentive to go to the cinema anymore, or the theater.
Yeah.
You want to be not super high society about it, but yeah, because there's I mean I can wait 7 weeks and it'll be on one of these 17 streaming platforms, right? Like Oppenheimer,
Yep.
Barbie, like all the summer blockbusters last year were out of theaters in 10 weeks, 12 weeks maybe. And then they go straight to streaming. So, and you don't have to go see the trailers anymore because all the trailers get posted on YouTube.
Yep.
So there's really no incentive to go to the movie theater anymore. So if they could build something like that where it's around the TV release, or if it's like a re-showing of like The Mandalorian, but all eight, or all 8 episodes at once, right? Just kind of something like that. That's fun and gets people together. I think that'd be a great thing for theaters to do.
Yeah, they could even make it a 2-night thing of like the first 4 episodes this night, the next 4, the following night. Like
Mhm.
come share this experience. That'd be that would be interesting. I mean, look, the Return of the Jedi made a boatload of money last year. This movie is already at like 15 mil worldwide
Mhm.
on it. Um, they're gonna want to keep getting these re-releases, the theaters, and it'll become a big question when you get to a year like 2027, which is the 50th anniversary of New Hope, but also the 25th of Attack of the Clones. It's like, which one are you putting in theaters? Are you putting both? Are you putting one in May, one in April? Like, how
Mhm.
are you going to divvy some of this stuff up? Um, Curious to see how they continue to do it. But I think after last year and they did Return of the Jedi, they were like, okay, this is profitable. And all we're doing is throwing it back out there.
Yeah,
There's no new work done to
there's no effort. It's
it.
just it just prints money.
And then they're able to just throw like a little thing to get incentive of like, hey, check out we'll show you a special scene for the Acolyte.
Hmm.
And then people that maybe don't want to see Phantom Menace are like, well, I kind of want to see that scene though, and they'll go. So that's great. Hopefully they keep doing it. All right. Well, I guess we'll dive into the comics. We're gonna. There are a lot of comics when it comes to Phase One and any of these phases. Sean and I are really only going to cover issues 1 through 15 of the main Marvel High Republic comics run by Cavan Scott. This is where I think I still haven't read the Dark Horse stuff. I'm going to try to do that sometime after this, but I kind of ran out of time on all this stuff. It was real. What's the word for that? Ambitious on my
Hmm.
part
Yes.
on what I was trying to do, and ran out of time. Got other stuff going on in my life, so I figured this is a good way to kind of wrap it up too, because this arc, these first few issues, start like right after Light of the Jedi, and they're gonna end right at the same part of Fallen Star. So I feel like it's a good kind of catch up to end on of like, oh, remember when we were talking about Light of the Jedi, blah blah blah, all the way up to where we ended last time with you on Fallen Stars. So I feel like that is a pretty good through line on how this comic goes. This comic does touch like every villain that we've had. Like you get the Drengir, you get the Nihil, you get the Nameless. Like you get all of the three main villains of the High Republic Phase 1 throughout this whole arc of the 15 issues. Um, yeah, so I read this probably last year sometime for the first time. Like I think I read the first few issues maybe like early 2023 or late 2022, somewhere around there. Kind of fell off of a bit, and then when I was getting to uh Fallen Star, which I finished I think around August of last year, around that time of Ahsoka, when I was like full Star Wars mode. I'm like listening to the audiobooks, I'm watching the show, I'm like doing everything Star Wars. Um and then at that point I'm trying to like balance between, and I think you mentioned you did this too, like, okay, I'm reading this part of Fallen Star. Now I go to this comic and I
Hmm.
have to read this issue,
Yep.
and try not to get too far ahead of where I am. And that leads to some cool things like Stellan's side of the conversation in issue like 14 of this, where he's calling Avar. We see that in Fallen Star, and there's parts where you're like, oh, okay, I know where we're at on
Hmm.
certain like storylines. But um, from what I can remember, and when I reread these, I think I like the later arcs of this comic more than like I think it's the first five. Um, where it really focuses on Trennis and her master skier, and skier kind of losing the plot a little bit, right? Like that storyline, not as big of a fan as then when we get to more of the Nile part and
Hmm.
getting to Starlight Beacon, which I think the comic then was really really riveting.
Yes.
What was your thoughts on the like first 15 issues?
Yeah. So this is actually the very first comic book I have ever read. I was never a big comic fan growing up, and not I just didn't read them. And so I thought, okay, I will jump into Star Wars comics, and this was the vehicle for that. And now I have, I don't know, 80, 90 back issues of Vader and Star Wars, normal Star Wars, and everything to thank for that. So thank you, High Republic. But I actually just finished the story over the weekend in preparation for this episode, because I was staggering it with the books, and then I just would forget to come back to it. And it's actually really hard to believe that it's been out for almost 3.5 years.
Yeah,
And so the first issue printed on January 6, 2021, which is crazy. But I enjoyed. I agree. The basically from episode issue 6 on. So basically, when you get the kind of the full blown Hut Jedi
yeah.
Drenger duel on Sidri Minor, and then through to Undercover Kiev, which was awesome. Undercover Nihil.
Yes.
And when I was reading about Orla, and I was like, oh my god, I know you, because of course I've read about her in the books. And so it was just really cool to come back and finish the back half of the story after reading the novels, because again, it fills in so much. um I did enjoy that. I do like that they kind of focused more on the other adversary as opposed to the Nihil, because the Nihil are the main kind of protagonists, right, in the books. So the Drengir are kind of the first kind of main protagonists. So that was kind of nice. You didn't get that sort of direct overlap with the same adversary in both media, right?
Yeah.
And so, but yeah, the kind of final showdown with the chase of Lorna D, and then the capture, and then um, you know everything that happens at Starlight Beacon. It was just as riveting as the novels were, right? Like Light of the Jedi, I felt was kind of a slower kind of build, where then you got kind of the fireworks kind of in the back half of Rising
Hmm.
Storm and into Fallen Star. So I feel like the comics mirrored the books quite well. And for a first time comic read, it's really well written. Cavan Scott's done a phenomenal job with the writing. Of course, carried that into phase 2 and phase 3 now. And the illustrations are incredible. And so for anyone, I tell people, if you've never done Star Wars comics, get the omnibus now. The omnibus is out. Get
Yeah.
it. It's a fun read. It's a great story. I've really enjoyed it.
So interesting. I forgot that you mentioned that last time, that this is the first comic you ever read. So you said now you got like back issues and stuff of Vader and all that you're gonna read. Has it made you interested to read any comics outside of Star Wars? Like, have you ever dove into anything outside of there at all?
So,
Or
right.
I could phrase this another way if you haven't, but like, would you be more willing to now that you have read like comics? I guess.
Yeah, so I've looked at, or I've picked up other kind of random issues. Like there was a Wolverine issue I picked up. It
Mm,
was like the Death of Wolverine, issue 1. This was probably beginning of last year, maybe. And we actually picked up a Sonic the Hedgehog comic for my son.
nice.
One of the last time we were in the comic shop. So I am I because of how quickly you can get buried in comics, I don't really want to jump into another line and then love that story. Like, this is a bad, oh, I love the story and now I got to buy everything, right? Because that's
Yeah, yeah,
kind of how it goes, right? Now, what I have considered is doing the Marvel Unlimited,
yeah,
like the digital subscription, and then doing it that way, so I don't have the physical media to have to manage.
yeah.
But uh, yeah, it has definitely made me more open to reading comics in general. And I found myself enjoying how comics flow, if that makes sense, because it's such an interesting way of reading. You have to get
Yeah.
good at knowing which bubble to jump to, like when you've got
Hmm.
7 bubbles
Hmm.
in a cell, right? And so it's just a really interesting way of reading and consuming a story. And so yeah, it's definitely opened me up to other, um mostly Marvel, but some DC stuff too.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I right here next to me, I have three long boxes of comics issues, and my free comic book day, my comic store also gives away free 20 back issues that you just get to pick out, right? So like they had these special ones that they set aside, and I went through them, and I have a whole stack of those here. And I am subscribed to my comic shop, but I'm trying to whittle it down, right? Like I'm having a baby, like I gotta make sure I have less books, but um I also do have like Marvel Unlimited and DC Infinite, DC Universe Infinite and stuff, and those make it very easy to be able to read like pretty much anything. That's how I read these. Like I think I own the first two volumes of this on paperback somewhere, but I was rereading these just on my phone so I could I take screenshots sometimes. I'm like, oh, this is a cool thing.
Mhm.
And the digital comics are great because you can do panel by panel, and you'll really flow through it then, because like the whole screen will be one panel. and you're just going through, and you don't even know what page you're on. And sometimes the comic ends, and you're like, "Oh my god, like that was quick."
Mhm.
I'm like, I was riveted, you know. And that kind of can help guide you too if you're at all like, "Oh, I don't know which bubble to read." Like sometimes it'll draw the like camera almost like the screen to
Mhm.
which one you should be reading at that point. Um, so yeah, definitely recommend like Marvel Unlimited or any of those for any listeners out there too. Because if you're a fan of that, I have a Marvel podcast, I have a DC podcast, and of course have this Star Wars podcast. So I'm in the comics.
You're not busy enough. You need more.
Yeah, I'm not busy enough. I needed to do more. I have a soccer podcast. I have like a million podcasts. You know, whatever's out there, I have a podcast for it. I'm sure. Um, but yeah, so that I find it so interesting that this was like your first comic that you would have read, and I assume at that point you were already into the High Republic, right? You probably had already read Light of the Jedi and stuff, and you're like, well, I need to know the full story. I got to get these comics, or was it like? Was there ever resistance to you when you're about to read these? Like, do I want to read the comics? Can I just read the books? Like, was there anything of that there?
Yeah, so it was one of those where with the first phase, so I purchased, so I actually got the comics first. I started getting the comics first.
Oh, okay.
Um or around the same time as I bought Light of the Jedi. And then, you can read the first 5 issues because it takes place after the Great Hyperspace Disaster. So you don't really like ruin anything per se.
And she's kind of like on her own. Like for the first issue or two, she's kind of like separated enough where like it's
Mhm.
not like again you're not going to get really spoiled from it.
Right. I mean, other than knowing that Avar is okay, right? She makes it off head. Like basically, if you haven't read the story, then the plight of Hetzel, oh, is this actually going to, like, are they going to succeed? Right. Okay. That Avar makes it and a couple, the main players kind of make it. But other than that, you don't really ruin anything, per se, as far as that's concerned, because you don't talk about the Drengir or anything like that. And so I read the first 5 issues kind of in tandem with the books. And so, but I found myself wanting to read it and then realizing, like I said earlier, I don't want to spoil this. And then I was so slow to get to some of the books that the back issue, the later issues kind of languished, saying, read me. But I was like, I don't want to ruin the story. So, uh, but again, reading it this past weekend, it was actually a lot of fun. I was one of those where I like to binge things, just like a lot of us, right? And so to have all 15 issues to just be like boom, 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 5 7 minute reads, it was great to have the complete story just ready to go. But no, I found myself really really wanting to read the comics, because it was so well written.
Yeah. So like we said, it kind of starts off with Trennis. She's doing her trial, right? Like, or she's gonna like she's studying for the trial. She's getting ready for the trial. And to become a Jedi Knight, and she will get knighted. I think it's after the first issue,
It is.
right? Yeah. So it's a very quick bit after getting to know her in this, but she has like this whole adventure on this planet. Her master is Skier, who does get injured in the Light of the Jedi. I believe he appears in the book there. He does get injured. He um, loses his arm, but he's a he's a Trandoshan, right? He it should grow back. It's not going to be a big issue, but he also is kind of struggling with the loss of, I think it was Jorah Mali that he
Hmm.
was close to.
It was.
And she died on uh during Light of the Jedi, during the Hetzel stuff. Funny, Jorah Mali's been like all over the place because in Into the Dark, she is actually Reith Silas's master. And he gets sent away from her to go to the Amaxian station, which is where he runs into the Drengir. And when he gets back from that is when he learns of Jorah Mali's death.
Hmm.
Then you have, Skier being close to Jorah Molly as well, and then the fact that she actually appeared in Light of the Jedi as well. So like you kind of have her in everything. She appears in this comic, I believe, as well, or at least mentioned. But yeah, so she's kind of been like this kind of important Jedi for a few characters that we get to know throughout the course of the comic. One thing I do like that the comic does too is I think they all do this, like the books and stuff, but the comic specifically does a good job of weaving in and out the characters. Um, like at a certain point, we're gonna run into Vernesta Rowe
Yes.
and
Mhm.
her Padawan Imri on the station, and I had read the comic originally before I had read any of the Vernestra stuff. Rereading it this time, I'm like, oh look, there's Vernestra, there's Imri. Like I know these people now. Like so that hit me a little differently this time. Um, so that was cool to see, and it does line up with when they're on Starlight Beacon compared to some of these other characters. I will say, I think the only thing it doesn't do as well as the books is the passage of time. Doesn't feel like it happens at all, right?
Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
if I was to read issues 1 through 15, I would probably think this all was a very bad week for for Keeve Trennis.
Mhm.
This is a year plus that happens in the story because it's like a year between Light of the Jedi and Rising Storm, and then I think another year or so between Rising Storm and Fallen Star, or 6 months. It's
I was gonna
close.
say
It's like a
I think Fallen Star takes place a little bit closer to
yeah,
Rising Storm because the Republic Fair disaster had just happened, and
yes, yeah,
everybody
yeah.
was kind of rallying after in the hunt for Lorna and the rest
But
of them.
maybe between a year to like a year and a half, this whole story takes place,
Yep.
right?
Mhm.
And the comics feel like that passage of time, like I said, is very, very quick. That'd be my only downside to the comics, and sometimes trying to fit in where we're currently at in the story can sometimes be difficult. Unless if you have a guide up that's like read this issue, then read this chapter of this book, then go and read this, like
Mhm.
um, Lorna D gets captured at the end of this arc, and part of me was like, is this leading into Tempest Runner? No, Tempest Runner should have already happened at this point,
Mhm.
right? So
Yeah.
me trying to fit in like where some of these things are is tougher when I'm reading 1 through 15 like straight. Like if you just read these things straight, you're like, wow, that was quite the ride. But I'm kind of confused on where we're standing on time and all of this stuff.
Yeah. The movement with Lorna, and which I loved how she was illustrated. Like all of the characters were illustrated so well. I kind of alluded to that earlier. With like seeing Orbelin on the Ataraxis, and then yeah, understanding that okay, so Lorna's been captured, which means that Tempest, the whole Tempest Runner story audiobook has taken place in between there, basically, right? Because it's Avar's hunt for Lorna D, and for the most part, I think. Again, I still have that on my to do listens list, but yeah, I think because it's all contained within one book or one story, right? To your point, it does make it difficult to understand where you are. I kind of mentioned it at the very beginning about Young Jedi Adventures and how it leads into. So I was reading again this weekend the first issue. They're preparing for the dedication of Starlight Beacon, and Master Maru's talking to Keeve, I think over Holonet or whatever, and he's like, we're like 6 or 7 hours from the dedication, and the very last episode of season 1 of Young Jedi Adventures has Nubs, Liss, and Kai at Starlight Beacon looking for the dedication plaque that Tabor
Oh,
stole.
nice.
And then they finish the episode with them in the chamber, and Chancellor So talks about the beacon and everything like that, and they get to participate in the For Light and Life that we see at the end. So they're in the same room canonically as Keith Trennis and everybody else.
Yes.
And so it's really cool, having the animated show, which has now come 2 years after that first issue was written, right? And seeing people like Bell and Ember and Master Maru and even Loden's in it, or Loden's in an earlier episode. He's not at the
Right,
dedication,
right, right.
but anyway, so that's it's really cool how that gets woven in, and then jumping to the very end with Starlight Beacon in the book, because we're living on the bottom half of the beacon, we'd never get to see what's happening on the top
Yes.
half, right? And when Avar gets there and the Ataraxis gets there, and she walks in, and Maru is literally holding the entire station together, right? And then in the book, you recall when it separates, and you're like, oh
Yeah.
crap! Well, that's what happened. Is he literally held it together long enough to let as many people escape as they could, and it's just it's awesome to have that other perspective. And you mentioned
Mm-hmm.
Stellan and his conversation with Avar earlier. The ability to have the comics give you Avar's perspective while we're living in Stellan and Elzar's world and Bell's world, in Fallen Star. The only thing we didn't really get a whole lot of is uh, like the Republic Fair, right? The Republic Fair happens in the background of the comics, right? It's referenced and through the beacon
Yeah.
basically. So which is fine. I think Cavan did a fine enough job, a great enough job writing that story that I think we can all visualize pretty much what happens there. So, but again, it focuses on Avar's hunt for Lorna D. So, you get that aspect of it too. So, um, it was really and to wrap up the Fallen Star thing with the Ataraxis, for some reason, I thought that Avar had escaped the top half on the Ataraxis, but then of course we learned that she escapes through one of the escape pods. I don't know why. I don't know if I got that mixed up or if I just forgot. But again, it was really cool, and enjoyable to get that second perspective. For those of us who read the books.
Yeah, there's just tons of little great moments like that throughout. Um, I guess another one of my like nitpicks would be that the again with timing is when they arrive and see that the thing is just blown up, and started to separate. They said they got an hour, and
Hmm.
I'm like, it took a lot longer than that in the book, for this to go south. So, um, you know, two different writers trying to fit stuff in their own pacing. It happens,
Hmm.
but that was something that I'm like, uh, listening to the book, and they're talking about hours like going by, and then like the comic is like, no, it's just 1 hour. That's all we got. Um, but yeah, seeing Avar, I guess let's. We mentioned it last time. I think a bit was my surprise that Avar was not as much in the adult books as we thought she was going to be. She was the lead in Light of the Jedi, like one of the front and center on the cover, and by the end of that, she's almost exclusively in the comics. She'll get like little scenes here and there, like when Stellan calls her in the Fallen Star, or flashbacks for Elzar and Rising Storm. But like rarely is she ever in the books after Light of the Jedi. She'll like appear in some of the young adult books, like she's in Out of the Shadows briefly, again, just being on Starlight Beacon and Vernestra talking to her, but not like a main player. I guess let's kind of start with Avar and her journey in this, because she goes through a lot more than I would have ever have guessed, right? Like she is kind of tempted by some dark side thoughts and behavior. She almost loses her way a few times. Something that's very shocking when everybody calls her the light of the Jedi, right? Like Maru says that as he's holding the station together. But there's a few times where she almost slipped. Do you think that is like there's sometimes I didn't really dig Avar because she was kind of being a jerk about certain things
Hmm.
in this comic. Um, Part of me thinks that's intentional to make her not be as perfect as we all were led to believe, right? Um, but part of it was sometimes hard to like reconcile what we're seeing compared to what we've heard in other mediums. So I didn't know if what your thoughts now that you've read all of these comics and you read them like all in a row, and then you get to we've talked about the change of perspective in locations and events, but how about change of perspective in characters and how like different she is compared to what we hear from Stellan and Elzar and characters like that.
Yeah, I think with her, she spends the first half of Light of the Jedi, literally holding all of the Jedi together so that they can protect Hetzal. And then she comes back and she's in the comics, right? She's made Marshal of Starlight Beacon. And it's almost like that it's almost like a demotion, right? It's not, hey, you're not on the council. It's, hey, we made you Marshal. And I don't know what, we don't know what her aspirations are as a Jedi, if it's to be on the council or what have you. But she talks about not having time to I forget the Jedi Master's name, but he comes in with Yoda in the first issue, and I almost feel like, kind of like the way that Stellan does, struggling to know who she is or like who she's meant to be, right? And I feel like Skier is kind of the comic embodiment of Elzar in that they struggle with their connection to the Force. Now we learn that Skier's is more of a medical condition, which was actually kind of interesting to learn. So it makes him kind of immune to the nameless, which is a cool touch, right? But seeing Avar kind of descend in her quest for Lorna, um, I personally like when Jedi have vulnerabilities. I think it's kind of naive, despite the fact that we see the Jedi as these amazing beings, right? I mean, in the end, they're just, well, for the most part, human, but they're people, they're individuals, what have you. They have their own ambitions, aspirations, stresses, that sort of stuff. And I feel like with Avar in the comics, you see her struggling to understand why she can't why she is unable to do what she believes she should be able to, right? So like whether it's contacting or feeling people through the Force, through the Song of the Force, right, or being able to stop the Drengir threat, be that protectorate, right? I think she has this thing voiced upon her about being the light of like this beacon, right? And then it puts that extra pressure on her, kind of like with Stellan, where he's become the poster child for the Jedi after the public fair, right? And he feels all this added pressure, and then he's got Avar over here kind of doing her own thing, and so he's trying to bring her in. And so I think Avar's trying to live up to maybe people's expectations, and then in the process she loses herself, or she nearly loses herself, and it's Keeve who has to bring her back. So
Yeah.
I liked that in the end, like, she comes full circle, right? So like,
Yeah, yeah.
she collects herself and she gets there to the beacon, and she tries to do what she can, but there's nothing to be done. And so in that process of, I think, trying to live up to certain expectations, right, people can tend to lose themselves. And so I think Avar did her character, um does a good job, I guess, of embodying that sort of stress and strain that comes with that mantle that she's been put in.
Yeah, interesting to kind of compare that with Stellan because he, like you said, he kind of goes through a lot of the same thing, especially like when he is having uh, thoughts, right? Like, so it is interesting when Jedi are portrayed as more human, right? Because in the prequels, they've kind of shunned a lot of the human side of them. Uh, and while they kind of reference, like, there will be times where Avar or Stellan will be like, "Oh, we shouldn't be feeling this way," but it doesn't seem like it's as taboo as it is in the prequels. Um, so when you have Stellan like having that conversation with Avar that he has in this comic, he also has it on the other side of that in Fallen Star, and his like narration self is like he feels kind of like not hatred, but like he's upset with Avar and how she's handled this, and he's feeling like envious of her position at marshal, and now he's glad he's the marshal. He feels like he deserves that, right? Like, and then he's like, wait a minute, that's not something I should be saying as a Jedi. And he does catch himself on it. Avar kind of catches herself on that kind of stuff throughout this too, and it adds a little bit more humanity, more relatability to what we see from certain Jedi. Um, I don't know if this will be really relevant, but I'm watching the Phantom Menace in the re-release. The Yoda felt very different. Not just because they CG'd his awful puppet from episode 1,
Oh,
but
I love
because
the pup. I love the
did
puppet.
you?
I
Oh
love
no,
the puppet.
they tried to make him look younger, but he looks like 100 years
Yeah,
older.
yeah.
Um, but like his voice, the Frank Oz voice is more closely to Empire. I feel like he didn't seem as like wise as we get of Yoda in like Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. Like he seems almost a little bit more, I want to say, like human
Mm.
in Phantom Menace, where he is, the delivery is a little different than what we think of like stoic Yoda. Because I feel like sometimes Yoda is almost this Mickey Mouse type character. And what I mean is he's gotten so famous for being a certain way that now he can only be portrayed that way.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So like Yoda is known for being wise and being one, always having the jumbled speaking, and it's like that is what you get in like Attack of the Clones or Revenge of the Sith. Clone Wars, he's very like, I'm smarter than you type of way he phrases stuff, very knowledgeable. Phantom Menace, like rewatching that, he does not feel that way in that movie at all, and he feels closer to original trilogy Yoda, which I think is very interesting and something I didn't really ever think about until this re-release. But I think he's more interesting in Phantom Menace because, like I said, I think he's a little bit more human. He's not afraid to show Obi-Wan that he does not agree with Qui-Gon and that he does not agree with Obi-Wan, but that the council does, and he's been outvoted pretty
Mm-hmm.
much in that case. So I find that very interesting because I feel like if they were to write it now, Yoda would be more stoic, wise, generic Yoda that we kind of get. And what I mean by like Mickey Mouse, like Mickey Mouse when he was originally made was like a nuisance, right? Like he was smoking cigars, he was slamming back beer, like all this kind of stuff. He was a troublemaker. But at a certain point he became the mascot of the company, and now he's really only portrayed as like, oh boy, like that is Mickey. His image is being kind of more sanitized. And I feel like we kind of got that with Yoda recently, where like now even if they write him in these projects, he seems more like wise and stoic than he does in like later years
Mm-hmm.
of episodes 1 and the original trilogy. And like 2, 3, Clone Wars, Rebels, he's like very like wise stoic Yoda. I don't know, just something that came to me, and I like you said, the more personal humanity version of these characters.
Yeah, and I think if we consider the fact that, and I think we talked about it during Fallen Star, and how I liked the Nihil as a an adversary because of how humanizing they make the Jedi, right? And how the Jedi's, hubris would eventually lead to the downfall and everything like that. And so, when you get like Mace Windu and Ki Mundi, who are just like complete doorknobs, right? Like they're so strict on the doctrine and the dogma, whereas like Yoda kind of has that, he playfully plays both sides, right? Obi-Wan,
He's
I
a
think
maverick.
he is, and I think that's why he and Qui-Gon, like, yes, they like spar, right? But I think because Qui-Gon was so defiant of certain aspects, right? Whereas like Obi-Wan, I think, was trying to be more like Mace, or not necessarily like Ki-Adi Mundi, because I don't think anybody wants to be like Ki-Adi Mundi, but because he was, but the and so
Well, you certainly don't want to be Caddy Mundi on Maigito when he's
no,
getting shot by his clones.
by his bark troopers. Um, but yeah, so having Yoda portrayed in a kind of playing both the yin and yang, right, and being able to play both sides, whereas Mace is this one way or Obi-Wan is this one way, and um, and even Anakin to an extent is like kind of this one way, right? Like, and I think having him be that balance to whomever he's in the room with, I don't know. It's an interesting way to portray the character.
Okay, let's talk about Kiev because she's like the main character of this whole comic. I don't know if this is really a spoiler. I haven't read Phase 2 or 3, but if you read Dooku Jedi Lost, or if you listen to that, um, she's one of the Jedi that they mention having left the Order, one of the fallen Jedi. Um, Now they don't mean it in like the dark side way, I don't think, but she just kind of like from what I understand, she leaves the Order at some point. Um, I don't know if that's happened at any point yet, or if that's like maybe a end goal of Phase 3 or beyond, whatever they're gonna do. But I just remember getting spoiled on that in the sense of when they announced Keeve Trennis, people were like, "Oh, she was mentioned in Dooku Lost. Like, we're gonna see her start as a Padawan and go to Jedi Knight, and then maybe leave the Order," type of thing. And um, so far, I don't really see what it would be that would cause her to go. So I just thought it's interesting that that might be her path if I have read everything correctly online.
Hmm.
Um, so, but she's the main star of this. She is kind of the one, like you said, brings Avar back when she's about to kill Lorna D and kind of end some of these Nile. But she also goes through her own journey of losing Skier. There's this whole Skier is very interesting because he has like this whole like I don't know if I would call it mad cow disease, but for Trandoshans, where he is has this thing where he kind of starts going wild there. He gets infected by the Drengir a bit, then he was doing that just to find a weakness in them, and then all this stuff. But what we learn is that he's losing connectivity to the Force, like you mentioned. And at the end of this issue, he's saying, like, this is my last mission. He does end up dying, it seems, on Starlight Beacon. But so she's gonna lose her master, who she was close to. She kind of has to go through this whole thing of where he's not acting like himself, and there's a lot of mystery with that we get to the bottom of. Like you said, she goes undercover as a Nile raider. I thought that was pretty cool. But what's your thoughts on Keeve and her character progression throughout these 15 issues?
Yeah, so I thought her arc was that kind of I call it traditional Jedi arc, right? Going from self-doubt to inevitable, eventually having that confidence to follow their path, right? And so um but just like I think with like Belle, and again, I think there's a lot of parallels between the books and the comics, right? So you have similar relationships, in both. So with like Belle and Loden, and then Belle and Indira, right? Because Indira takes Belle on after Loden is captured, and so the relationship that she has with Skier is one that I think obviously drives her emotionally, but it also centers her. It centers her as well, and so having I enjoyed her, or I enjoy her, because again, I haven't actually started the Phase 3 comics yet, so I'm not sure if she's in there or not. But I enjoyed the uh, I enjoyed the way that they took her story. So, with Skier becoming infected with the Drengir, and then her trying to kind of like go in and help him by getting, in a way, infected them herself, right? Because she's like, I can help you find, in this case, the great
Right.
progenitor, and we can find like the hive, the root of the Drengir, right? And but then on top of that, in doing that, right, she sees like this dark Sith backstory of these old Sith who released the Drengir, or initially captured the Drengir in the first place, which I was like, oh, that's interesting. So you've got like ancient Sith, you know, pulling in the or not pulling in, but interacting with kind of the ancient Drengir, and how, you know she goes from self-doubt in the early issues to eventually being the adult in the room. And I think it's a credit to Skier, and obviously she credits Skier a lot, and that's how she actually tries to bring him back, right? I forget exactly what she says um, about if we fall down, we get up and we try again. Like when she failed during her trainings and stuff like that, to try and connect with him again on that level. And similarly, when she brings back Avar from kind of her slip into darkness. And so, you know, at the end of all of it, much like Bell, um, they're stronger both because of their masters, and with their masters being, well, without their masters too, right? Like it's that completion of the training, and that completion of the arc, and that completion of that growth to becoming a true Jedi Knight, not just in ceremony, but in action.
So I went back to look just to check. I was right. It says Trennis in Dooku Lost, Master Trennis, and Yoda's like, "Oh, what a shame! What happened to Master Trennis?" It doesn't say Keeve, though that'd be weird to have two Master Trennises, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And when Cavan Scott was asked if they were the same, he avoided the question. So I don't know. And then there was apparently a Yoda comic that came out where it takes place before he trains Luke on Dagobah, and he goes to that cave and has a vision of Keeve
Mm-hmm.
Trennis, and she kind of mentions, alluding that Yoda just let her be resigned to her fate. And yeah, so I do think they're going to be the same. And I think maybe that might be a phase 3 thing at some point here, or something that we get for sure. But seems like that hasn't happened yet at all. So there you go. But some hints, maybe something will be coming for Keeve, that she gets disillusioned and leaves, or something happens to her and she leaves. Um, you can kind of see why. She's gone through a lot already.
Mm-hmm.
um, but yeah, she has this great image at the end where she's kind of like the crutch for Avar. She's holding Avar. She is. You can kind of see why she's probably going to be a Jedi Master fairly quickly. She's already been a knight for the last year, pretty much. But if she does become a master, I think she will, right? And it's just going
Mm-hmm.
to be, that's her path, and then we'll see what happens after that. But yeah, she's gone through a lot with Skier. Um, she did a lot of the legwork in these comics
Mm-hmm.
of actually solving the issues whenever they came up.
One other thing, and we mentioned Orla earlier, but she's the one who
Yes.
actually writes, or like reorients Keeve, right? Oh, when
Yeah, yeah.
or yeah, when
And she
she
thinks Orla's kind of weird that she's like what do they call them? Like
a way
wayseekers,
seeker.
wayfinder. Yeah, wayseekers. Um, about how she can just like have the freedom to just do whatever she wants and leave the order type thing.
Yeah, and with again, the struggle that she had with having those dark visions and doubting herself, and in fact, we see in one of the visions, right, she gets actually stabbed, right, during a lightsaber duel. And so again, the fact that Orla is the one who reorients both Elzar and Kiev. So she basically goes from helping Kiev to helping Elzar find himself after Velo. So again, you get that the parallel between the characters in the book and the comics. So so she doubts herself in the early days. She struggles kind of in her early knighthood to the point where she has to be brought back, and then she uses that newfound strength to build, to bring up others, to build up others. So yeah, I saw this. I found this thing on Wikipedia about I guess her fate.
Yes, yeah, that's
About,
where I found it too.
yeah, about her taking a ship, I guess, to the edge of space to deal with an insurgent threat. Dun dun dun. So, but we'll leave
Yeah,
it.
so I guess that'll happen sometime in the future here.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
um, but yeah, okay. How about what Tarek and Sarah? Right, like they interesting concept. I would say they are two people that are one.
Mm-hmm.
Right, like they're two bodies, but they share a mind, and their names are literally just like the same name forward and backwards,
Mm-hmm.
just reversed. So pretty interesting. What did you make of them? Because they're very I don't think we've ever seen anything like this in Star Wars. Sharing one mind but two bodies.
Yeah, it's like the ultimate Force Dyad, right? Like, because it is a singular
Yeah,
mind,
there you go.
right? Versus two separate individuals. But um their their time in the books, I always kind of chuckled half the time because Keeve couldn't tell them apart, which of course, how could you? And then
She started getting better at it though.
she did. And so, but then they always kind of had that like quick, I don't, it was like a weird like comedic, they weren't the comedic relief, but they always had kind of this timing. And then unfortunately,
Mm,
they're affected by the nameless, right? Or the
yeah,
leveler, right? One and the same. And which, seeing those, or that in issue 15, like seeing what it looked like is terrifying. So like having listened to Fallen Star and understanding like what it, trying to picture what it did to people, but then seeing that brought to the pages
yeah.
was something else, man. But that they get to come back at the very end with the song of the, like, what was it? It was through, I think it was through the song of the
Listen to
Force.
Avar's song.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
was through the
listen to
song.
Avar's song. They get up and they actually save Kiev from
Yes,
falling out of the ship.
it was awesome. And so yeah, no, and I think they were, um what was it? I think they were the first like non-binary
Yeah,
Jedi or
non-binary.
whatever
Yeah,
in something, non-binary Jedi in canon. So which is cool to have as well. And so I think for both characters, you know their roles, their that force bond, right? Very interesting concept. And as characters, they were, I enjoyed them. I enjoyed reading about
yeah, because you have like I think it was Tarek that eventually first gets got right, and then
them.
Sarah's like feeling it, and then like kind of goes into almost like a coma when something's happening to the other one, and you're like, oh wow, like um, just yeah, interesting concepts on the Force, and also just somehow being like twins born, but being the same person. It's
Mhm,
kind of
mhm.
wild stuff. But yeah, they wake up in time to save Kiev, which is great because was worried about them dying
Mhm.
because they surprisingly the comics didn't kill that many people off.
Mhm.
We lost Master Noran or Norin. She gets leveled, I guess you would say, from the nameless.
Husked. She gets
Yes,
husked.
husked, and
I mean,
but luckily,
Orbelin takes a blaster bolt to the back of the head.
oh, true, true. And then you
Below
have
the knee.
Maru who dies while
Yeah.
he's holding in place together. So there's three deaths in like one issue alone. So my bad. But the main crew pretty much, well, Skier died too. Sorry. Yeah. So maybe I was wrong. But they all waited till the 15th issue to do
Right.
that. um, but yeah, you were mentioning Skier and how he kind of is like this Elzar, uh, like like similar to Elzar, right? Because Elzar loses his connection to the Force a bit, and in Fallen Star, he's able to kind of go through unhurt,
Mm-hmm.
unaffected by the Nameless. We get that instead through Skier, and rereading it, I was able to kind of you see how quickly they put this in place. Like his Force ability is starting to go in that like first arc, you know, because they knew where this was heading and they knew what they were doing. So it wasn't like out of nowhere where he's like, oh, I'm losing connection to the Force, and just happens to, like, they've been setting this up for a while to when you get to this point, you're like, oh my god, that makes sense why he's not affected. And if you're doing it the way I did, where you're like reading a little bit of the comic and then reading a little bit of the book and then back to the comic, it was like real thrilling at that point because I had no clue who the Nameless were yet, really, and like still kind of figuring out like why is this happening to people, and then you're seeing like part of it in the comic, part of it here, and then you're drawing that line too of like, oh, Elzar's not affected, maybe Skier won't get affected then, or vice versa, you know, whatever, depending which one you read first. You're like, Skier's not affected, it means Elzar should be good, right? Like, and you're holding on to hope that these characters are gonna make it through, but he's able to save Keeve and Avar because he was not affected, and he was able to scare them off a bit, because who wants to face a Jedi who doesn't have connection to the Force and is a Trandoshan with a huge lightsaber? I'd be like, no thanks as well. They run off, and you know, without him, Avar, Keeve, all of them probably bite the dust here.
Definitely, yeah. Skier is that hero. He's the last second, the 11th hour hero in that last issue. Because yeah, they did such a good job of giving image to, like I said, what was going on in the books, right? Uh, and and so yeah, the I loved Skier as a character because he had the right mix of comic timing with obviously the struggle and him not understanding why he can't feel like when a Nihil's trying to sneak attack him and everything like that, and then him losing himself kind of to his Trandoshan rage. That's kind of what I chalked it up to, as opposed to like the dark side. I felt it was more like just Trandoshan
Yeah, well, it's like
rage.
it does. Yeah, it wasn't Dark Side except for like maybe when he was infected by the Drengir, maybe.
Hmm.
But like what we learn, right, is that this disease kind of like makes them go like feral almost,
Hmm.
right? Like his urges as a lizard being of a Trandoshan kick in, and he's not able to think straight. So he just attacks. He just like, and what I would kind of imagine is like, I would say almost like if we were to have something like a form of like Alzheimer's or dementia, where like he's not going to remember stuff, right? Like he's going to go and have problems remembering, and he's just going to lash out on people that he doesn't want to hurt. And that's kind of what his fear is. I'm going to lash out at you, I'm going to hurt you, so please leave me be. um but then there's times where he needs to jump into action, you know, like Avar tries to bench him, and he's like, hey, I'm gonna go. Like Keith kind of convinces them, like, hey, let's just go out and do this thing, and then if you get benched, you get benched, you know, later when you done talk to the council. But we need you right now.
Hmm.
And he's like, fine, yeah, I'll do that.
Well, one last ride for Skier.
Yes, and unfortunately, he gets
It
a
wasn't.
few missions where he thinks it's the end, but this one was really
Yeah.
the end for him, to my knowledge, anyway.
Yeah,
Once he survives this,
there's no, I mean, you can be Trandoshan and things can grow back, but you ain't surviving
yeah.
the
Could you imagine, like,
hurtling into the Iramian surface.
yeah, all of his pieces land, and then they start growing back into like 10 skiers start growing.
That would actually be that, like it would be the leftover of the Drengir, right? And so he'd still
Yes.
have some Drengir left in him, and so he's got 10 skiers. And you're like, you know what? We could use this to our advantage, and just having an
Yeah,
army of
that would be
skiers.
cool. Um, yeah, but overall, really great stories. I think my favorite arc is that Fallen Star arc of it at the end, and I just have fond memories of kind of flipping between the book and the comic. It'd be like, tonight I'm gonna read. I think I can read like one issue or two issues of this book, this comic, and then it's like tomorrow I'm going to listen to this much of the audiobook, and then I'm gonna read the next issue tonight, like that kind of thing. And that was a lot of fun, and it was a way for me to still be interacting with it while I wasn't, because I usually listen while I'm on my walks and stuff, and after I do my walk and I'm like laying in bed, after the rest of my day and all that, I'm like, oh, I can still interact with the High Republic through the comic right here, and
Mm-hmm.
I can catch myself up a little bit and read this one, and then I was reading the Trail of Shadows and that kind of stuff as well, to help. Like if I caught up on the main comic arc, I'd be like, well, I haven't read Trail of Shadows yet, so let me dip into that, and then like the next day I would be able to listen to more of the audiobook. And it was just a new way for me to connect to this era that
Mm-hmm.
I've been really enjoying. So it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's definitely made my enjoyment of the High Republic like this was the perfect. Those first three books, phase one was like if you're going to launch an entirely new timeline into Star Wars, I don't think they could have done a better job than they did in phase one. Like the characters, the villains, adversaries, the fighting, the confrontations, the battles, everything. It was the epitome of Star Wars, right? And it's made me. I love the High Republic time frame now, and I really look forward to what they do with the Acolyte, and I hope that it does this timeline justice and everything like that, because the books have done a phenomenal and comics of course have done a phenomenal job with it to this point.
Yeah. So before we wrap it up, I guess since this will be the last one that I put out, I think what I'm going to do is for the listener here, I'm just going to let you know. Um, there is still another Friday before the Acolyte launches on that Tuesday night or whatever. So I think what I'm going to do is maybe one last episode that is just another like primer of the High Republic, just general talking about the era, stuff like that before we get into Acolyte, maybe what we want to see from the Acolyte, that kind of stuff. And then uh we'll go into Acolyte coverage once that kicks off. But Sean, what I want to ask before we get out of here is like, as a High Republic fan, what do you want to see in the Acolyte? We already know we get Vernestra and stuff, but like, what you said maybe about doing it justice, what does that entail? Like, what would ring false to you if you're watching the Acolyte and you're like, ooh, they didn't nail that?
So the thing that I'm most concerned about is, as has kind of happened with some of the other live action stories, is they've either felt really truncated or um, just incomplete. And obviously we don't know these characters, which is it's a perfect playground for storytelling. And so what I hope is, one, I hope they don't just go and um, like retcon some of the stuff. Like for example, with this dark side user, if this turns out to be a Sith and he's revealed himself to the Jedi, well, then what Darth Maul says at the beginning of Phantom Menace about the Sith returning to reveal themselves, then that just goes away. And maybe that's not super important, but I mean, I feel like the Sith kind of returning needs to be the Phantom Menace. And so, what I hope for the Jedi is, one thing is we're gonna get a lot of Jedi. I hope that's actually the case. We get that scene where it's like six of them together, right? But in all of the stories and all of the comics, you've got two, three, four Jedi together at the same time, kind of going around buddy buddy, right? It's not just master apprentice or singular Jedi. So I hope that we do get kind of like the cohort experiencing the adventure together. Um, but and I hope that, I mean, I hope, of course, we get certain callbacks to the time frame that we've read about. Um, Vernestra, of course, we get her. It'll be interesting to see if we get any other kind of quote legacy characters. But uh, I don't know. The only way that I could, I guess, be quote unquote disappointed is if it, well, one, like I said, if it does anything to kind of mess with the timeline that comes after this, but if it doesn't focus on, well, the Jedi at their height. And obviously they're going to be encountering this adversary, right? But we've seen the fall of the Jedi. Let's see it visually. Like, what does it mean to be at the height of the Republic? You imagine these like golden towers, these, this kind of brightness, right? And you get that in some of the episodes, right? But there's also going to be that darkness too. And so as long frankly, as long as they tell a good story, I'm going to be happy. But if we get to the end and it's just like that's it, and there's nothing, or where we just race to an ending, that'll probably be the only way I'm disappointed. But if I'm honest, Star Wars, for me, is it's got to be woefully bad, like holiday special bad, to be like, and even then, I'm still going to watch it. So it may not be my favorite, but the fact that we get as much Star Wars as we're getting right now, it's really hard for me to be critical of anything.
Yeah, I mean, I dreamed for the days like this of getting like
Mhm.
2 shows a year, 3 shows a year, whatever we're getting right now. Um, yeah, okay. You mentioned legacy characters. What are the odds we see Yoda? Pretty good
I mean,
or not?
I would say if they spend any sort of time at the temple on Coruscant, then there's probably a decent chance.
That's what I'm thinking. I like. While I would be fine if we didn't see Yoda, it's like I feel like they're gonna throw the casuals a little bone there to be like, oh, here's a Jedi Council scene with Yoda, and maybe people will recognize Yaddle and Yarl Poof and whoever else is in there around that time. But um, I do think that they'll probably do that for the casual fan who's maybe like, I don't know any of these people. They'll be like, oh, there's Yoda. Okay, I got a little bit of an anchor here.
I'm I'm hoping that we also get with the new Wookiee Jedi. Obviously we get Burry in the story. I want to understand. And I don't know that we'll get it in the show, but it'd be nice to kind of understand how that works. Bringing in a Wookiee from Kashyyyk and then having them train as a Jedi, like you know them being upwards of hundreds and hundreds of years old. How does that work? Being a Wookiee Jedi. I assume it's probably similar to other prolonged.
Or like Grogu. I
Yeah,
mean, yeah, because Grogu's like, when the temple goes down, if he's 50 and
yeah, we're
so
about
he's like,
50. Yeah, we're about 50-ish years from Grogu being born, I think.
yeah, yeah, we're about that. But so I'm like, I guess it'd be the same as like Yoda, right? Like Yoda at this point is in his 750, 800
Mhm.
years old time frame. It's like, how old did he become a master? Like, become a master at 100, and he's just been on the council for like 700 years, or um, you know, is it a different level for their maturity? Because Grogu's 50,
Mhm.
and he doesn't seem like he's ready to get close to knighthood even at this point, right? So like, how old does that go for Jedi that are hundreds of years old? Like you said with the Wookiee, like we know Chewbacca's like in his 200s, and he's like middle aged, right? So like this Wookiee Jedi, is he a knight and he's been a knight for like hundreds of years because he's not ready to make the leap, or do they spend more time as a master because they um reach master at like what a human would, right? Like Mace Windu is like in his 40s probably, you know,
Yeah.
and 40s or 50s as a master. So you would think like a Wookiee could do it in that time too. But
Mhm.
yeah, yeah, it's interesting when you get to different species and how old they are. Like Yeah, I feel like there's a good shot Yoda makes an appearance in at least one episode. I wouldn't be shocked if it's the first one to just be like, "Hey guys, this is Star Wars. This is a guy you know," and then kind of introducing us to a lot of these newer characters that'll take control of the story for the. Is this 6 or 8? Do we know that?
Yeah, it is 8. It's 8 episodes.
Okay, cool. So for the next 8 episodes, yeah, but I'm really looking forward to it. I'm especially after that scene and just how well the action looked. I'm feeling like we've got a good one coming up. So can't wait. Hopefully, this makes more people fall in love with the High Republic era, and then they go back and read some of these comics, some of these books that we've spent time talking about in the build up to it. So,
yeah, the last episode is slated to drop on July 16th.
Oh, great!
Based on what we talked about before the show started.
Oh, that's wonderful. So I'll cover as much as the Acolyte as I can, but I do have friends that'll be covering the show with me that will be taking over if the baby comes early or around that time.
There you
go. If you're listening to us on the show here, we'll still get you covered one way or another, whether I'm able to be on the finale or not. But yeah, Sean, thanks for coming on. Why don't you tell people where they can find your podcast?
Sure. Yeah, really appreciate you having me on again. It's a lot of fun to talk High Republic. You can find myself and Jedi John on the Force Dyad Podcast at Force Dyad Podcast on Facebook and Instagram, at Force Dyad Pod on Twitter. You can find the show on pretty much any podcast platform: Apple Music, Spotify, YouTube Music now because Google Podcast doesn't exist. But yeah, and Good Pods, etc. So yeah, follow us on social media. Come listen to us jabber about Star Wars. We have a good time and yeah, have a lot of fun.
Yeah, you can follow this podcast at Podawakens on all of our social media. We're also on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, where you can rate and review us over there, or you can like and subscribe to us on the YouTube channel if you're watching over there. We're continuing our chronological Clone Wars watch every Wednesday. My friend Logan's first time watching the Clone Wars, so those episodes are continuing to drop. We are in season 4 now, so getting through it. The plan is to get those all recorded before the baby comes, and then I'll be releasing those all the way through September, I believe. So
That's awesome.
That's the plan. And then we'll take a break, and then we'll come back and do Bad Batch and Rebels and all that. And yeah, and then Fridays have been this High Republic Road to the Acolyte. That'll be ending, and we will be actually talking the Acolyte. And in that case, maybe I will actually have to change around when chronological Clone Wars drops, because those are on Wednesdays. We'll probably watch the show on Tuesday and record on Wednesday. So I might have to shift chronological Clone Wars over to Fridays during the Acolytes run. So
Acolytes are dropping on Tuesday.
Yeah, Tuesday night, right?
Yeah, Tuesdays. Yeah.
Yeah. So then I think they're at like 9 p.m.
Yeah.
So then we'll probably watch it Tuesday, record on Wednesday, and I'll probably try to upload it on Wednesday. But since I already released Clone Wars on Wednesday, I'm gonna have to shift that probably to Friday. So that'll probably take the place of the High Republic series that I've been doing. So
there you go.
Keep an eye on that if you're interested. I mentioned it during the show. I have a Marvel podcast and a DC podcast. Those are To the Infinity Saga and Beyond, and Elseworlds, a DC fan podcast where we talk all that good stuff. Covering X-Men 97, that wrapped up, so make sure you stick with us over there. My friend Ron and Chris will be covering Deadpool and Wolverine, since I will be out on paternity leave during that time. So make sure if you're interested in all that, you can check us out over there. Have a great rest of your week. We will catch you next time as we build closer and closer to the Acolyte.